All right. Well, I guess we go ahead and get started. It's only a 45-minute session, so I don't want to wait too long. It looks like it's already recording, so you know, fingers crossed. All right. Welcome everyone to Classic Website Blunders. Um, uh, we'll talk about things that can go wrong with websites, and hopefully what you can do to prevent a website project from running off the rails. Um, and remember to abide by the Florida Drupal Camp Code of Conduct. It's a good code of conduct. I read it, and if there are any code of conduct issues, please feel free to reach out to the appropriate folks. They can help you out. And as a reminder, tomorrow there is Contribution Day, so feel free to participate in that. And there are planned workshops and planned initiatives. So this is Classic Website Blunders. So what are we going to do here? We'll kind of introduce me and kind of talk about some different blunders that in my time in the industry we've seen, and then kind of how you can avoid those blunders and sort of the important process to make sure you don't happen into blunders, and if a blunder is happening, maybe be able to get out of it without it derailing a whole project. So just a little intro of who I am. I'm Stephen PASHBY. I'm an account manager at DesignHammer. We're a full service website strategy design development firm. We do pretty fair amount of Drupal work, though not the only thing we do. I've been in the industry over 10 years and I've been involved in dozens of web projects. So I like to kind of open with impressive project management statistics, right? Um, frankly, when I looked these up, it was surprising, but also sort of hit home. Um, most organizations have a 70% project failure rate, and projects on average go 27% over their intended cost, which is, kind of truly frightening for both of those statistics. Um, and budget overrun is frequently cited as the reason for project failure. Um, but kind of aside from that, projects often don't meet their goals. So even if you're on budget, but if the project doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do, um, that's I would even argue, a more significant failure. And then, also commonly the project doesn't align with business goals. Um, and there's kind of a common feeling, I think, that there are certain things that can be true at the beginning of a project that kind of doom it to failure from the beginning. So with those kind of terrible statistics in mind, let's maybe look at a way to have some fun with the topic, as well as hopefully identify some of those blunders. So this is obviously a screenshot from The Princess Bride, one of my favorite movies. And you start off, you're going to build a new website. Why not? How hard could it be? Um, I like to think that there are a lot of different parts that make up a website project. Um, so in a quote from the movie, fencing, fighting, torture, revenge, giants, monsters, chases, escapes, true love, and miracles. And I think all of those sort of line up with kind of the journey a project takes. But why frame a talk in 2021 with a 30-year-old movie? Well, in some ways it's incredibly prophetic. So, one of the main characters is the man in black. He wears a mask for most of the movie, and that's maybe a little relevant to our time today. So, blunders, classic and otherwise. So, in Princess Bride, there's the phrase of a classic blunder, and the two classic blunders that they talk about in the movie are never get involved in a land war in Asia and never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line. Those hopefully will not run into your particular web projects, but there are other blunders that definitely show up. So I think one of the key ones is kind of lack of a business case for the organization. So what does that mean? So really, a project doesn't really have a use case or business, and it's not really solving a business need for an organization. So the risk is, even if the project achieves what it's trying to do, ultimately for that organization, it's just wasting time and money. And if a project isn't aligned with what the organization is trying to do, it's kind of doomed from the start. So there kind of has to be a reason for a project to happen. Um, so you want to identify goals and determine how the project aligns with what the organization is trying to do before investing time. So one project that I remember that kind of was an instance of this blunder was we were working with a financial advising firm. Uh, they were primarily kind of high touch, working with a clientele with a significant high wealth individuals. Um, and they brought us in because they were trying to create kind of a new business line, which was sort of entirely uh, outside of their core competency, which was having a subscription website where um, young upwardly mobile professionals could pay them monthly to receive videos that their founder would make kind of when he felt like it about things that they could do to save money. So it was essentially like, hey, you go to Starbucks every day. Here's how much money that is in a year. I mean, kind of shockingly, since they basically uh, had this sort of if we build it, they will come mindset. The project, even once it was launched, never really took off because they didn't really have a business case. They didn't have a way to align this with what the organization was good at, their existing clientele, or a plan to actually get this in front of the right people. So, one of the really key things, if you find yourself, particularly as a project's being defined, that it's maybe doesn't seem to have a business case, is take a step back and try to work with the product owner or project owner to make sure that this somehow aligns with what the organization is trying to do. Because otherwise, even if it succeeds, it's probably going to fail. So another really common blunder, I think, is unrealistic expectations. Um, Projects, even if internal, external, working with a vendor, working with all in-house folks, they're always constrained. Time, money, they affect what can be done. To some degree, kind of the capabilities of the team also affect what can be done. So um, if you have unrealistic expectations, the project might get derailed at any point along the way, and really likely you're going to end up with feature creep that might endanger the project ever finishing. So you want to keep an eye out for this kind of throughout the project, because whenever particularly stakeholders have unrealistic expectations about what a project is going to deliver, they frequently end up with uh, they're unhappy, right? So you want to really focus whenever something comes up, say, hey, here is for kind of our scope, for our time frame, this is how we can realistically deliver this particular piece. um, so it's a good idea to kind of keep in mind kind of what other similarly scoped projects deliver. um, so and try not to compare a project with something that's like orders of magnitude different. So frequently when we're talking to clients, they're like, well, what sort of design inspiration do you want for this project or something like that? They might say, hey, we really like the Apple website. And I mean, it's like, well, Apple spends probably on their header graphic what you're spending on this project. So there's a limit to how much you can get. Just really managing what your expectations are kind of throughout the project is a real key to making sure that what you finally deliver is delivered and is delivered in a way that the end stakeholders are happy about it. So another really key blunder is insufficient schedule. Um, you know, it takes time to do projects well and to do them in a kind of a stable, sustainable fashion. So it's pretty common that that when you start to kind of define a project, at least some stakeholders along the way have an idea that this project, well, we really need it launched in, for its particular conference or something like that, or for this date. So that's 3 months out, so that's plenty of time. But they haven't really kind of thought through each step of the way. And so it's really important right at the beginning to kind of assess what do you actually need to get out the door, and what are the different pieces that need to get in place for that to happen. Um, again, this is one of those that could be doomed from the start. Um, a good example is we were talking with a cell phone company, and they were rolling out a new product. They told us, like, this is the most important project launch in history. We need a new website for it, so on and so forth. We need to integrate with an internal registration system. And they told us this will be ready in 4 weeks. And then they said, well, since it's so important, we definitely need 2 full weeks for us to test the final candidate. And they said, now we want to take our time and make sure we got the right partner. So we're going to take 2 weeks for that. So we kind of bailed on the project at that point because basically we would have had effectively 1 day to complete the project once they picked the firm to make their other timepieces. So kind of shockingly, when when the project was when the 6 weeks were up, there was no new website. So it's a real shocker, right? So another one that's I think a really important thing is absent or uninvolved leadership, right? So you know you don't want to have necessarily every possible decision maker in a project, but you need to have the right people at least keeping an eye on things. Um, and this can take a couple different forms. One, it can just have you don't have access to kind of critical stakeholders during a project, or you end up like there is some key leader who really needs to have a sign off who just isn't there. Um, so what this risks is, you could deliver, and everything could be well documented and everything, and the project could be rejected out of hand once it finally hits um, that critical leader or critical stakeholder. So you need to make sure when you're defining a project and during discovery and planning, and even through production, that the person who's going to give the final approval for this project is actually to some degree involved. And then it's going to also be critical to make sure that it lines up with the goals of the organization, right? So kind of go back to that earlier blunder of lack of a business case. Hopefully, if you've got the right leaders, at least keeping an eye on the project, then they will actually say, "Oh, wait a second. Um, our reason of being for this organization is to do this. This project doesn't do that, so let's get in line with what we're trying to do." Um, so you really want to make sure that the right leadership is involved, when you're setting goals and metrics and at key approval stages. So an example that we ran across was we were working with with an organization redesign their website. Um, and they had kind of unusual organizational structure. They had their president, who is very important and very busy, but at least our client contact told us he is just unable to kind of um, uh, think in the abstract or extrapolate from an incomplete product. So it's like I can't show him design concepts. We can't show him the alpha candidate. We can't show him the beta candidate. You know, we can't even show him anything until all the content has been entered, and then he'll look at it and tell us what we need to change. So I mean, again, kind of shockingly, once this kind of Uber stakeholder reviewed it, it added a month and a half to final delivery and about 20 grand worth of work. And all of that could have been avoided by actually having this stakeholder engaged in the process earlier. So that's that's something that could really bite you at the end. Kind of related to that is another sort of similar blunder of a junior project manager, right? Your project manager. I think project managers get the short end of the stick a lot of the time, where they're like frequently it's like a junior person, particularly on like a internally or on a client side of things, where it's just a junior person and they're treated as sort of a glorified gopher and run people downs, to just make sure that meetings happen and stuff like that. And really, you need someone who is empowered to either make decisions or force decisions to be made, right? So if you have someone who's too junior in that role, they are going to be doing their darndest to keep the project on schedule and on budget, but they have to make decisions because decisions have to be made. And if they don't have the authority to either make the decisions or to compel the people who have that authority to make decisions on schedule, then it's really likely the project's going to run off course, and particularly over budget or off schedule, because decisions have to be made. And if decisions are made and they're the wrong decisions because the right people didn't weigh in, then there's a lot of pain at the end. So we were doing another project, and we had this was a complex Drupal 6 to 7 migration with a lot of highly customized web form data. Um, and there is a big transformation in how the data was going to be handled in the new site versus the old site. Um, and the we had inherited this code base, and so we'd done a survey of the web forms and kind of the data. Thought we had a good handle on it, but as we were going through the project, we just kept finding more edge cases and more edge cases and more edge cases and more edge cases. And the project manager said, no, you said that we'd do this. So, we've got to migrate all of the data. It's non-negotiable. And we, we, we got to the point where the CEO of the organization we're working for called us up and said, hey, this project's not done. I want to cancel it because it's just not done. And we got everyone on the phone, and we explained to the CEO, like, look, there's so many edge cases, so many corner cases. It's so messy that we just can't, we just can't, we don't know where the end is. Can we not migrate the data? She's like, oh, yeah, we don't need that data. And we wasted, you know, a month and a half of time on that because the project manager was too junior and didn't either know or didn't feel that he could go to the CEO and say, hey, there's new information. Maybe we should adjust the scope of the project so it can get done. So that is a place where that can really bite you. Communication breakdown. So this is kind of a general blunder, but again, pretty serious. Um, I think a lot of times, at least I know every dev I've worked with, most designers I've worked with, a lot of clients are all busy, and devs and designers often hate meetings. And so it's that a lot of times ends up with irregular meetings, right? Or you might have documentation that is like, oh, we all kind of agree in this meeting. So, the notes are like, we agreed on the implementation, not this is what is going to be implemented and why we agreed to do this. So this ends up where you get down the road and not everyone is still on the same page about what was agreed to. So it's really critical kind of throughout the project to make sure that whenever there are decisions made, you document it and you say, this is what we decided, this is why we decided it, this is how we're going to do it. um, make those decisions, document them, circulate those notes so that when the project is ready for approval, everyone can, and if there's some confusion, you say, oh, you know what? On this meeting on this day, we talked about it. Here's what our notes say. And these were shared with you. And like, and a lot of times that'll jog someone's memory, like, oh yeah, that's right. I remember now. Or, 6 months, 9 months after the project's launched, there's been some turnover, and someone comes in and says, hey, this is crazy. Why is it done this way? And if you've got the documentation and say, well, there were these considerations, and we as a team agreed to do it this way because of XYZ, then a lot of times folks will say, okay, that makes sense. Um, the worst thing is to keep all this in email, though. Like, so when some new a new person comes on the team, it's like, all right, I'm going to forward you 150 emails, and spend your Friday afternoon trying to get yourself up to speed. um, so that's a way that communication can break down. That's a pretty common blunder. So one that's maybe a little more amusing is design by committee. I think this is really common in the nonprofit world, particularly because there's a lot of kind of consensus building. um, really, if you end up with too many people, too many cooks in the kitchen, no one's going to be happy with the final product. Um, so this tends to cause decisions to be late or there to be changes, and again, no one's happy because the team tries to satisfy everyone rather than keeping good focus on a clear vision for the projects. Um, so we're working with a large NGO on a UI redesign. And due to political considerations, they required 18 uh, people on the committee for the design approval, to representing each of the 18 business units. Um, so the project was expected to take 4 to 6 weeks and have 2 stages of revision. Ended up taking 9 stages of revision, and ran 6 months behind schedule. No one was happy with the results, and a bit later, they threw the whole design away and went in a different direction entirely. Um, and as an aside, they also, in all of these 18 people providing input, they never provided the input of, and here is the branding guidelines for our business unit, so it also needs to adhere to those. So more common with smaller nonprofits, but still an issue, is kind of the vanishing volunteer. So a lot of times when you've got kind of enthusiastic volunteers, you can have some folks who are very, very skilled. They bring a lot of skills to the table, and they're happy to kind of help out an organization. So it can seem like a really great idea, like Sue Smith, she's a great developer, a great designer, and in her day job, she does this stuff all the time. So she can handle our website, and she can integrate it with this and can do that or the other thing. But one of the things that's a real issue is if you've got if someone's giving their time to you, something might happen, right? And so you may end up either with a volunteer just disappearing in the middle of a project, leaving you with a half-built site, or you can end up where you've got a site that works, but no one at the organization knows how it works or how to support it. Um, we've seen it where it's like, hey, here is a sort of working uh, site, as well as a, hey, our volunteer web developer built us this site in this technology that only 3 people in the world use. And last year there was a security vulnerabilities. Our site got hacked, and it was a huge amount of headache and you know to try and get the site back up and patched. So the relying on volunteers for kind of mission critical stuff, it can be a you know it can be a short-sighted decision. A lot of times it makes sense if to either own mission critical in-house, or work with a large enough firm to provide redundancy, right? So then it's their job to make sure that there's not a single point of failure. So this one's a little bit more for kind of maybe the devs in the room. Um, and I think a lot of times we can end up in the situation of, hey, this is we've got this project. Oh, I was reading about this new piece of tech, this new way of doing things. Let's do that. Um, and that's a little bit of a, sometimes that's the right answer, sometimes it's not. A lot of it comes down to what are the core goals of the project, right? If this is a major initiative with a lot of organizational support behind it, and you really want to be on the most up-to-date platform, then it can make sense to maybe embrace some of the extra pain to use a more cutting edge uh, technology. But if it's not a major initiative and you don't have that extra calendar time and extra man hour time to kind of deal with kind of getting those rough edges off of using cutting edge technology, you could end up with either something that just runs well over budget and schedule, or something that's just really unstable. Um, so it's important to think about, like, kind of what is the scale of this, what's the time frame that it's going to be, and then does it make sense for us to own that extra technical debt and that extra learning curve of implementing something that either we haven't done before or no one has done before. So I think a lot of times, if you kind of focus on what the project goals are, they help you guide, they help guide your choices, both in design and technology. And then another, like, kind of I'd say this is probably the final blunder, is ignoring risks. I think a lot of times everyone that's a part of a project, they want the project to succeed, and they don't want to talk about kind of bad news or things that could go wrong. But there are always risks to a project, and if you don't get into the habit of like actively identifying these risks and talking about them, then you won't have a good remediation plan in place for when something does go wrong. And this needs to start, project definition, and then through discovery and planning, and then you need to keep kind of updating these through production. I think that seasoned project managers understand that identifying risks, it's not a sign of a project being bad or being pessimistic, but rather it gives you an opportunity to say, so here are the things that we currently see as potential risks of the project going off course. And here are some ways that we could think to mitigating those. And then when something like that happens, you're able to say, okay, we've already talked about a way that we can mitigate this. So we are working in this kind of cutting edge technology. It's taking longer to implement than we were expecting, but we had already identified that if that were to happen, we could reduce this other scope to provide time to get this core cutting edge feature working. Or we're working at cutting edge technology. We're doing a proof of concept here. Proof of concept's not going well. Okay, we already identified that we could go with a more stable, well understood piece of tech to deliver on time. So 10 classic blunders. So how do you avoid them? So at a high level, you want to make sure you align with your organizational goals and then align your expectations with the resources that are available. Um, Involve appropriate stakeholders for input, feedback, and approval. Get feedback from potential users. I've talked a whole lot about that, but that can be really key if we're building something that users are going to interact with. And then follow a process to make sure that you're always checking the same boxes that you need to and documenting what you decide. So I think when you're aligning with organizational goals, it's important to remember what you're trying to do, right? In the words of the Princess Bride, I've hired you to help me start a war. It's a prestigious line of work with a long and glorious tradition. So I think it's good to kind of at least, once you've got a handle on what an organization is trying to do, say, okay, this project, how does it fit in? Is this a core organizational focus, or is this maybe a discrete tactical initiative like a landing page or a website that's going to focus on a specific aspect of the organization's business or goals? Or is this a director's sort of vanity project or maybe a boondoggle? Knowing what that is will help you understand how to approach the project. And that understanding can guide how you scope and resource. So you want to make sure that your expectations align with the resources you've got. Because if you don't align that, you end up in some strange places. So, a well-resourced project that is like in line with an organization's core focus, that can realistically have probably a more robust set of expectations. Um, but if it's sort of a proof of concept or a vanity project or something like that, you may end up needing to scale back expectations, particularly if you're working with a particular decision maker to make sure that what can be delivered for the resources is what is expected. So if you're not investing in the resources of Apple, shouldn't really expect an Apple level of polish. So you kind of have to get used to disappointment in that way. So stakeholder involvement, it's important to have the right stakeholders in the room, right? Because they help you get things done. So the stakeholders may vary depending on what the project is. So um, you might need some stakeholders involved for technical requirements, other ones for information architecture, a third group for design, and then it's helpful to kind of get the right sort of end stakeholders involved for user acceptance testing, and then who is the person or persons that are going to give the final thumbs up that this project is done and ready to launch. And if you kind of identify those folks up front and then involve them at the right time, it really helps the project to move a lot more smoothly. So kind of as an extension of that is user surveys and user testing. Ultimately, a lot of projects are going to work with certain audiences, and so if you involve those audiences, you can actually deliver a much better experience for them because it more closely aligns with what they're expecting. Um, so if your site meets all of the organization or your project meets all of your organization's internal goals, but users have a hard time interacting with it, then that can be a real another source of failure. So there are a lot of tools that you can use to engage with your target end users, including user surveys, card sorts, tree testing, and kind of classical usability testing. And kind of figuring out what those tools will sort of fit in your schedule and timeline will kind of help guide what you should include. So the last kind of way of avoiding blunders is follow an appropriate process. Um, So, if you use the wrong process, then you will end up kind of approaching the project wrong and end up at the results you're not going to be happy with. So, I think it's important to kind of have, appropriate sign-offs from the decision makers at the right stages of the project. That can help with questions later. Um, Document every decision you can, right? If you don't document a decision, then you open yourself up for a risk later. And not just what was decided, but why it was decided. Liberal use of the change order if you're a firm, liberal use of editing the project spec if you're internal, to make sure that there is a source of truth that we can all look at and understand what is supposed to be delivered. And then, you know, with your dev, don't go too cowboy, right? Follow appropriate development practices, because that will lower your technical debt and simplify maintenance and reduce the cost of future development. So just a little bit more detail on the process to kind of close out. There are kind of four phases, really. There's sort of project definition and resourcing. What are you going to do and how are you going to do it? Discovery and planning. You get a bit more tactical about how, like, the actual implementation. Production, where you actually do the thing, and post-launch, where you maintain care and feeding and see how you did. So it's important to have your goal in mind and what resources you've got to work with. So this can be defining what the organization is going to do and why, who's going to be involved, what resources, and whether you're going to hire any outside resources. And that all takes time to bring that together. So it's important to kind of start with this phase and really get a handle on what you're going to do and who's going to do it. Once you've got that, then you can kind of move into the discovery and planning phase. And it's important to kind of really think about planning there. So we think it's really helpful to, at that stage, you're documenting how the project is going to achieve the goals that it's looking to do, the audiences and the metrics of success, right? How are you going to measure whether this is successful at the end or not? As well as determining content strategy, information architecture, identifying specific technology implementations, because you'll start with, like, we're going to use Drupal, to, we're going to use this particular module and we're going to use it in this way. Then, production, kind of where the sausage gets made, right? But you need to take time for that. You can't rush it. You can't just throw more people at it. So that includes your design process, development, content migration, and testing. Do not want to forget about testing. And then as a post-launch, what are you going to do with the site once it's up there, right? Is it, are you going to continue to build onto it, or is it, what's your review cycle? So you need to plan for kind of ongoing maintenance, as well as any updates to the content or new feature development. So kind of in conclusion, just some closing thoughts. Use a process. Try to avoid blunders that doom a project from the start, and then use your process to mitigate the effects of blunders that could potentially kill successful projects. So thank you, Florida Drupal Camp. Appreciate it. If anyone has questions, please unmute yourself and ask. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, because I think, just to make sure I can see the chat. So feel free also, if you've got, oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. I agree. So Digby posted in the chat, most important to get chief exec involved in talking. Yeah, I mean, it's like really twofold, right? I mean, one, because ultimately they're going to make the decision of whether something's acceptable or not. But two, they're probably going to have the most important vision of what the organization is trying to do and how they're seeing the project align with that. And you know, unless the person you're working with has a lot of sway over the chief exec, if the chief exec says, I'm envisioning this working this way, that's kind of the vote that matters. Very true. Very true. Yep. All right. Well, I hope you all enjoyed the slides, and I hope the Princess Bride jokes were at least amusing. I know that I was sharing this slide deck with another one of my colleagues, and we are of different generations, and she didn't quite pick up as many of the Princess Bride jokes, but maybe I'm just a nerd. But thank you all for coming out. I enjoyed it.